All right, I think we should go ahead and get started. We'll probably have a few more people trickle in throughout the night, but for now, thank you so much for being here. Hopefully we gave you enough time to scan the QR code and get the $25 offer. We've already had people booking coaches right now for technical interviews, behavioral interviews, and all of that with recruiting season coming up. I know it's already happening for many of you, so make sure to scan that, get that $25 and use it towards working with a coach to make sure you get the prep you need. Thanks again for being here. I'm really excited for the night and to hear from our outstanding panelists. This event is landing your dream investment banking role. Really excited for what the experts are going to share with us tonight. Tonight will be a panel format, so we'll have questions. Feel free to drop questions in the chat and we'll go from there. In terms of event logistics, make sure to ask your questions in the chat. Be respectful and supportive of other attendees, just in terms of chat, maintenance and all of that. And then please sign up for Leland. We have tons of free events we host, free resources, guides, news, all of that. And most importantly, excellent coaches to connect you with. So make sure you sign up so you can get all that in your inbox. In terms of tonight, we have a lot of exciting things ahead. First, we'll start out with introductions so you can get to know the Leland team as well as our incredible panelists. We'll do a quick Leland overview. I know many of you have come in from different channels, different networks, and so help you understand a bit more about what we do here at Leland. Then we'll pass it over to a quick investment banking overview. And then the rest of the evening, the bulk of tonight's event will be hearing from our expert panel and really getting all of the insight that they're excited to share with you all. Then we'll do a quick wrap up and excited to then continue our relationship and work with you all through Leland. Here we go. To start us off, our Leland team here tonight, we have Savannah. She'll be monitoring the chat, chatting with you there. John, our CEO, Andrew, our head of growth, and then me, Erica, head of experience at Leland. And I'm really excited to be moderating the panel and hosting tonight's event. In terms of our amazing panel, thank you so much to each of you for being here tonight. We're really excited about the information you're going to share, and I'd love to kick it over to each of you to give a bit of your background and an introduction. So with that, Drew, would love for you to get started.
Awesome. Thanks, Erica. Happy to be here. And thanks to everyone for joining. Just a little bit about me. I grew up in Arizona, and then I went to BYU. After that, I did 2 years as an analyst at Lazard. I worked in the restructuring group. And then after 2 years of banking, I transitioned over to Centerbridge Partners, which is a private equity / hedge fund. And I primarily do tech private equity for them. I've been here about 1.5 years, and I've been loving it. Excited to speak to you all tonight.
Grace, would love for you to take it away.
Hey guys, I'm Grace. I grew up in Houston. I actually went to BYU in Utah as well with Drew. I started banking full time about 1.5 years ago. So I started at Credit Suisse in their power and renewables group, which is super fun. And then about 1 year ago, I made the move to Goldman, and I'm currently in their technology, media, and telecom group.
Awesome. Thanks so much, Grace and Drew, for being here. And Samson, do you want to bring us home?
Sure. Thanks for having me, Erica, and great to see everyone for this event. I'm from New York originally and went to Georgetown University for undergrad. I interned as a summer analyst at UBS in their M&A group, and then did my analyst stint for 2 years at Jefferies in their kind of hybrid lev fin and private credit investing group. So definitely happy to kind of chat through some things there. And then I did a stint at Park Square Capital, which is a private equity, private credit platform for about 1 year, and then have spent time in kind of corporate strategy roles since. I'm currently at Disney in kind of a content strategy, business development type of role. So yeah, excited to be here.
Awesome. Well, thank you so much. Really excited to hear what you're going to share with the group, and more to come, everyone. Would also love to hear from each of you in the audience. If you want to drop in the chat where you're dialing in from, it's always fun to see the representation geographically, as well as schools, all of that. So feel free to drop your university, your location, any of that. Awesome. This is fun to see. Awesome. Cool. Well, keep them going, drop them in. We'll be here, we'll be monitoring the chat. So would love to hear where everyone's coming from. Now let's dive into a quick Leland interview. I don't want to hold you back from the expert insight we're going to hear. So let's dive right in. In terms of Leland, we are a coaching marketplace helping connect ambitious individuals like each of you with coaches who meet your budget, background, and goals to help you reach your goals and what you're hoping to get out. We're a very outcome-based coaching platform, and our main goal is to help you all reach the goals or the careers and the dream jobs you have through working with coaches. So our network has 250 plus coaches. That's growing every day. We're probably about closer to 300 today. We've raised 5 million in top seed money. We have 20,000 people in our communities today, and our site represents over 100 top universities and companies. I think the most important thing I like to drive home though here is, although we are a newer company in terms of Leland's life, our coaches are not new. We have coaches with over 20 years of experience who have helped cumulatively over 3,000 people get into their dream careers and education programs. And so as a platform, we are newer, but our experts are not new at what they do. And so we're here to help connect you with them. You can see here on the right side, we've helped people place in top banks, top consulting firms, tech companies, top business schools, things like that. So no matter what your goal is and your reason for being here, we'll have a coach for you and would love to help you meet one that's best fit for whatever it is that you're trying to achieve. How the platform works is you come on, you tell us your goal. So if it's, to work at Lazard or to work at Goldman, Jefferies, or land a PE job, take a test, whatever it is, tell us. We'll then allow you to browse coaches and see, reviews, read real profiles, get to know the coaches. Then you set up intro calls with them and you book directly with them. We have offerings for everyone. Everything we do here at Leland really revolves around the one-on-one coaching relationships. We are strong believers in the power of having that personalized help. We also have a community where it's filled with ambitious individuals like all of you, where you can, meet and collaborate with people who are on similar paths, people who are also, interviewing. You can find people to do mocks with, you can connect with coaches, things like that. And then finally, most recently added are our small group classes. So those are opportunities for you to learn with a small group live. They are not pre-recorded, they're interactive. You can ask questions to the coach. They are a very affordable option. And we'll be releasing more over the next couple of weeks. We do have a banking one about to drop, so we'll send that to each of you on this call. And if you want help with other goals, such as getting into business school or, taking the GMAT, we always have classes for those things as well. That being said, we would love to help you meet with your first coach. As mentioned before, sign up throughout this event by end of night tonight, and we will send you $25 to use towards your first coaching. And as mentioned, we'd love to help you get the technical and behavioral interview prep you need to land a job in banking. So that's a great way to use your credit. I'll leave this up for a moment if anyone wants to scan it. Awesome. Savannah also dropped it in the chat. Let's move forward though. And now we'll just do a quick overview. I will not pretend to be the expert at all of these. That's why we have the panelists tonight. But just to make sure we are all in sync, there are several elements of the investment banking process. I'm sure each of you on this call who are either exploring it or are in the actual thick of recruiting right now know there are several areas in which you need to prep to land a job at a top investment bank. a lot of it comes down to doing your research, your initial preparation, crafting your story, reaching out to people who are in banking. So networking, getting that in, working on your resume, making sure your work experience is relevant to, first get your foot in the door. And then really the bulk spent on practicing and mocking your behavioral interviews and really learning those technical interviews, which we all know requires quite a bit of work. And then the end goal is securing that dream offer. So with all this in mind, would love to open it up to the audience. Please drop what, in your experience, has been the most daunting part of the process so far, or what's been the most challenging. Yep, interview prep for sure. Networking. Yeah, keep them coming. Technical interview. Yep, coming from a non-target. These are all really valid challenges and hope we can help think through a lot of them tonight. Awesome. Well, thanks everyone. Keep them dropping in. We'll be monitoring throughout. All that said, we're really excited now to get into the bulk of the event, which is hearing from our panelists. So would love to kick things off. This is kind of just a very general, say what you want to say, and then we'll dive into the more nitty-gritty answers. But let's hear from all of our panelists tonight. Drew, would love for you to answer, and then we can go to Grace, and Samson, you can bring us home. But just looking at this to kick things off, what is your best tip for breaking into investment banking?
Thanks, Erica. I think one thing that comes to mind is just knowing why you want to go into investment banking, and really having that answer clear in your mind. I think is the best thing that you can do to really break in. Bankers are going to ask you that question. You need to make sure that you have a great answer to that question so that you yourself are motivated to get through this grueling process, which is banking recruiting. And I think being able to answer that question will help you throughout the process. And that's what I would say is that's what comes to mind immediately in terms of, the best tip.
Love it. Thanks for sharing. Grace, take it away.
Thanks, Erica. And Drew, I completely agree with you. I think also in my experience, just really leveraging the resources that you have, whether it's like a club on campus or whether it's like someone that you may know who, worked at a bank or is currently working at a bank, just being able to speak with someone or attend those club meetings and gain from the experience of those who, have gone through the process before you, I think has been, or at least when I was recruiting, was incredibly, incredibly helpful. And I would say, also be persistent. I think I saw someone said getting bankers to respond. I know sometimes emails will come in and it's hard to get to them right away, but if you're persistent, in my experience as well, you'll be able to get in that door. And I think that those resources will be incredibly helpful to you.
Awesome. Samson, bring us home.
Yeah, some great points, definitely. And I was going to mention perseverance as well. So Grace, certainly hit on the key one. I mean, even if you have a perfect background and, your resume is amazing, it's going to take a lot of interviews, a lot of reps to really get somewhere. So having that perseverance and that kind of grit, I think will also set you apart. And then something to add maybe with that is a bit of creativity. So I think the fact that all of you are here at this panel tonight, the fact that, you're trying to send those emails and network and kind of get that edge, I think is going to prove very successful versus kind of just feeling like you're following a standard formula. I think especially with finding people to network with that and being a little outside the box and how you think about who to approach or how to reach them. I think creativity, I think is going to be super helpful as well.
Awesome. Thanks so much for sharing. Now I'm excited to double click on a lot of the things each of you shared, and I hope that people are excited to hear their answers tonight. Great. So it sounds like a lot of you talked about that original step, which is, starting the recruiting process, like knowing your why, reaching out to people, being creative about how you get in the door. And I'd love to know, like, how do you go about approaching the many options? With banking, we see like the bulge bracket versus the boutique banks, specific industries, like many of you talked about, like power and utilities or restructuring, specific cities and different banks in each city kind of having a different reputation. Drew, I'll give you this one. How did you first think when you knew you wanted to get into investment banking? How did you kind of break down where you put your energy towards in terms of banks?
Yeah, that's a good question. I think the first decision that I made was there wasn't a particular industry vertical that I was overly excited about. And so I think New York was high on my list, given just the number of industry verticals that have their investment banking practices here. So that was the first decision I made. And then in terms of thinking about bulge bracket versus boutique, I didn't put a lot of thought into that. I think, the way I thought about it was I want to be at either a top bulge bracket or a top boutique investment bank. And sort of the decision between the two, although the experience as an analyst does vary a little bit, wasn't a huge decision point for me. I was mostly focused on where do I feel like I have a great shot? Where do I feel like, there's a seat for me at the table? And two, where have I connected well with people? And then three, what have I heard about these investment banks from people in my network? And I had a lot of classmates and friends actually that had worked at Lazard the prior summer. And so when I was recruiting for my summer internship, I relied a lot on them and their experiences, and that helps me a lot.
Awesome. Yeah, I think that's really important. We have heard a lot about like that initial networking and connecting, and we will dive a bit deeper on like what that looks like, because I'm sure people are hearing your answer and thinking, great, awesome, like that makes total sense. How do I get to the point where I feel, which banks I'm connecting with best? So we'll save that when we get to that slide. But Samson or Grace, is there anything you'd like to add to this question?
I would say I think it's certainly a really good point that you have to know yourself. And like, if you are, say, a generalist from an industry perspective or don't have a specific preference on bank type, then kind of following where you can get a foot in the door, where you can kind of leverage those connections are going to be huge. And all it takes is one, strong connection to really get you a job. And I've experienced that, myself, where, I didn't have great connections at so many banks, but then, I did at one place. And so I think, to your point, Erica, like people hear that and maybe get discouraged thinking like, I didn't have a ton of friends, that did these internships. But I would certainly say if you don't have a specific preference for, a city, an industry, like definitely keep things open for yourself. And if you do, I think that helps shape your story to the point of like having a really strong story. If you're like, I really want to be in, a specific city, or I want to be in this industry, like knowing that, having that story will really help you stand out against the many people that don't have that.
Awesome. Grace, anything you'd like to add here?
I completely agree with everything that Drew and Samson have said. I'll just add one thing that I think Samson actually has already touched on a little bit, but I think a lot of like the industry groups can like, for example, I think a lot of people are really interested in like technology because like we hear about a lot of technology like companies in the news. When I joined Credit Suisse, I was in the power and renewables group, and it was a group that I hadn't had a ton of like exposure to. I didn't really know, like a ton about the industry, but I ended up really, really enjoying my time in the group. And so I would just encourage you to like be really open about kind of what industry groups like you might be interested in, because I think there can definitely be like a surprise to the upside that you may not have anticipated.
Yeah, that's awesome advice. I really loved all of your answers, and I'm excited to keep diving in. Thank you so much for sharing. So I think that's a perfect segue to this question. A lot of you, or Samson and Drew specifically, talked about like, you know, the relationship building, the networking, if it's a friend, if it's you know, someone within your network. Grace mentioned at the beginning, clubs and resources like that. Grace, I'll give you this one first, and then we can follow with you, Drew. Grace, how do you recommend approaching networking? Like, a lot of banking begins with the coffee chats, the informal conversations, before you're actually at the interview seat. How would you recommend? So let's say someone's, you know, just starting their journey. What are the steps? Like, how do they begin?
Yeah, I mean, like, I'll just speak kind of to my situation. But for me, I think like the school I went to had like a really helpful, like, it wasn't a huge network, but it was definitely like a very like helpful network of individuals who had previously like interned or like worked full time at, you know, a variety of banks. And so because of that, I was able to kind of like reach into that network. And I started out like, I started out mainly with like juniors who had just gotten like internships and who had just gone through the recruiting process. And then from there, I started talking to like seniors who had done their internships, and then so on to like full-time people. So that's kind of how I would approach like planning out like who you begin to talk to. And then I think another thing about coffee chats is just like approaching them like not very informally. I think like for me, I think there were early coffee chats where I really didn't know too much about banking. But I think the coffee chats that were like more helpful to me were those where like I actually had already begun to think like of my story and like had, you know, prepared my resume. And I just felt like much more prepared to like really get the most from those coffee chats. And I think at the end of the day, like the coffee chats aren't like necessarily formal interviews, but they're definitely informal interviews. And so you want to make sure that you present yourself as well as you can and that you are as prepared as you can be, because those coffee chats, I think, can potentially propel you further forward in the recruiting process.
Totally. Drew, anything you want to add there?
Yeah. One thing that I always tell people that I'm sort of coaching through this process is be super prepared, be polished, know who you're going to be talking to, and go in with a purpose. It's not just to chat. It's not just a chat. It's like Grace said, it is really an informal interview, but the stakes are a lot lower. So I would recommend going into, you know, one of these chats and say, hey, I'd love you to review my resume. Hey, I've been working on my story and polishing that. Hey, I've been thinking a lot about why I'm interested in working at JP Morgan. I'd love to sort of share some of my notes, you know, if you're speaking with someone that maybe works at JP Morgan, for example. So go in with, hey, I'd like to accomplish XYZ, even if it's just one thing, and make it a good use of time for you, and then be prepared so that you can show your interest and your level of engagement to this person who will ultimately be deciding if you are going to get that formal interview down the road.
Yeah, that makes total sense. As a follow-up, how do you kind of balance like the like wanting to be, you know, natural and authentic and not too like interviewee, with knowing that the person at the other side of the table is evaluating you? Like, how do you balance that in these informal but also formal coffee chats?
Yeah, I think one thing to remember is that one way they are evaluating you is your ability to be natural, to be personable. You know, we always talk about the airport test. If they got stuck in an airport with you, you know, would they enjoy spending that time with you? So I agree, it is challenging. Just I think remember that, you know, these aren't interviews themselves. There definitely is a relaxed nature to them, and definitely approach it that way. But you know, in the back of your mind, keep in mind that it is good to be prepared. It is good to, at certain points in the coffee chat, show that you are polished, you are prepared, you're thinking about these things. I think that's important.
Awesome. Thanks. Samson, anything you'd like to add here? I know you mentioned having a friend in the space and kind of leveraging that to get your foot in the door. Would love to hear a bit about what that looked like from the pre-interview, like pre-resume submission stage.
Yeah, so I was going to add kind of on that point. I think certainly once you have the coffee chat schedule, preparing and all that is super important. But then how do you even get that coffee chat on the calendar in the first place? And so, obviously it's helpful when you have a lot of classmates or other alumni from your school. But I've seen in the chat people mentioning kind of non-target or non-traditional backgrounds, certainly making it more of an uphill battle, as well as someone mentioned like being in Montreal and like being in maybe a smaller city or a smaller market that doesn't have as many people. I think the key is really just finding someone with a common background. And this is what I've certainly experienced personally, and also what I've kind of coached people in the past, whether it's someone that went to maybe the same high school or secondary school, someone who is from the same, area as you. So like there are certainly investment bankers, in Montreal, and kind of being like, hey, I'm from here as well. Like I think finding that point of commonality is key. And again, being creative about it. Like it could be school clubs. It could be, your college major. For example, I was a math major in school. And so I wasn't in the undergrad business school. I didn't have that finance accounting training that a lot of people had. And so I kind of had to be a bit, outside the box as well. And every time I would connect with a banker that was a math major, even managing directors that were, twice my age would always kind of, talk about that and have some special kinship. So I think just kind of finding your edge in this process and where you might be able to connect with people is going to be key. And again, it obviously depends on your specific situation, but, you can't count anyone out. Like, just because you didn't go to a target school, you're not in, New York City or a big market doesn't mean, you can't find people on Wall Street that have some similarities. So that would be certainly like the biggest nugget I would advise to focus on, and certainly to start earlier rather than later. I definitely started earlier in school, and I saw again some people mentioning in the chat like they're in high school. It's never too early to kind of start that super informal coffee chat, just like come at it with a learning mindset, and it should be super valuable.
Awesome. Thank you so much. This was incredible insight from all of you. And I think, again, perfectly segues to this question, which a lot of you have mentioned, like the initial preparation going into these coffee chats. I definitely think there are moments where, it really is just like learning about investment banking from someone who's in that spot, people that personally, things like that, calling a mentor, calling a friend, where you can ask just like candid conversations. But really when you're setting up these coffee chats with people at banks that you're excited about, knowing your story is such a crucial part of the process. And so I'd love to hear from each of you. Samson, we can get started with you this time. Like, how do you craft your story so that when you do go into coffee chats, but also the entire interview process, you feel confident? Like, what does that story development process look like, and how have you helped clients get there?
Yeah, so I think Drew mentioned like the first and foremost important question is you need to know why banking and why for you personally. And again, that's something that, I can help give you examples of that, but ultimately it is a personal, like, why do you want to be in this industry? Is it to, be a career banker and, work on these transactions? Is it to learn as much as possible out of, school or some other program? Or is it, there are so many reasons. So I think understanding that, and that's certainly an area that I've helped people kind of hone down and really get to yourself of why that's important. And then I would say from there, like when you enter these networking conversations or interviews, I think it's super helpful to, constantly reference back to that story. So ultimately it's kind of like this theme or this thread you're going to be drawing through the interview of like, whether you're focused on a specific industry like healthcare, and it's, you've worked at your student investment fund and researched a bunch of these opportunities, or, a parent works in healthcare and you've always been fascinated by, the space, or, whether you're talking to a specific bank. I remember doing this, for some of the larger banks where, I've had a coffee chat with Barclays. I would look at their recent transactions and find one that like I had heard about in the news that piqued my interest for some reason, and kind of like bringing that up and saying, hey, I'm super interested in Barclays because of, their work with these types of clients. So, the story can mold and shift a bit, but ultimately it has this kind of core that is, true to you. And I think knowing how to kind of keep a theme and knowing how to adapt it, especially for different banks and different people, is going to be key. And that's something that I think is super important, like in any interview process. You're always going to be talking to different types of people and at different banks. And so, being able to kind of flex the story to fit in, but also again, be like true to yourself.
Love that. That's awesome advice. Grace, would love to hear how you approached your story creation as you began the investment banking interview process.
Yeah, for sure. And I actually just want to kind of like start out by acknowledging like how hard it can be, I think, to like craft your story at the beginning, especially because I think, most people who go into banking, I think, there's like maybe like some of the reasons that you want to go into like specifically a job like banking, but then I think the path that it takes to get you there can be like pretty different. And I think like really distilling that like path into, like a 2 to 3 minute, probably like, or even like shorter, like kind of story can be like a little bit difficult. But I think, Samson and I think Drew really covered this well already, but just kind of taking a step back and thinking like why you personally like really are interested in banking, and having like genuine reasons, I think is really important. I think, I've in the past made the mistake, and I think, I've also seen like others, but when there can be like really, I guess, almost like repeated reasons for wanting to go into banking. And I think like for, a lot of people, those can be really genuine reasons. But at the same time, you want to make sure that like to kind of, I guess, like craft that reason into your story a little bit more. And I'm not saying like you should talk about necessarily like your childhood, but go into a little bit of the background why, like specifically, like if you're interested in, working, if you're interested in like interfacing with these like really like incredible and like inspiring, decision makers on a day-to-day basis, and that's part of the reason why you're interested in banking, like give a little bit of insight into like why that is, and like what kind of why that's an important aspect of banking for you. And I think that will help you like stand out a little bit more, because I think at the end of the day, a story it's not just kind of like a checklist item. It's really kind of like a path for you to like set your conversation, to like open your conversation for I guess like set the tone for the rest of your interview.
I love that. That's awesome advice. Thank you so much for sharing that. And then Drew, if you have anything you'd like to add, feel free to chime in.
I'll just keep it quick. And I agree with everything that's been said. To Grace's point, I think it's a little counterintuitive, this whole idea that you need to prepare your story, right? But it's so important. I personally have, spent many hours on my story, and I've helped people do the same. And I think the key is just to remember, what's the purpose? What am I trying to convey to my interviewer? And it's 1, tell them a little bit about yourself. 2, explain why you want to do investment banking through your story. And then 3, demonstrate what you've done to show that interest, and show that you're prepared for whatever internship or full-time job that you're interviewing for. So I think just keep purpose in mind. That will help, the crafting process go a lot smoother.
Awesome. Thank you so much. This was great advice from all 3 of you. So I think you just chatted about this for a second, Drew, in your last comment, like thinking about, okay, I have this story, I have this narrative, like what have I done to bring that to life? Like what in my resume, what in my life, what in my experience have I done to really, emphasize that I want to be here? So I'll have you start out. Prior to recruiting for investment banking, how did you gain relevant work experience to get your resume ready? I think this is especially important for people on the call because recruiting keeps starting earlier. And so a lot of people have that question like, okay, how do I even gain the experience when I'm, newer in school to then be able to start recruiting for banking?
Yeah, this is a tough one. I think individual circumstances vary from person to person in terms of opportunities that are available to them, whether it be through their school, through their network. And so, what did I do specifically? There were internships sort of in and around the area of my school that I participated in that were tangentially related to investment banking. Whether that I worked at an early stage VC fund for a summer, um, and did other things like that. But one thing I'll say about this is you don't need to work in high finance to gain relevant work experience that can prepare you for your investment banking interviews. Um, at the end of the day, investment banking is really about understanding business models, understanding, and then the capital markets transactions that help fuel these businesses for growth. And there's lots of different things that you can do to sort of have a differentiated angle and get experience, whether it be working for a small business, sort of a strategy or like a finance role, starting your own business, working for the business of a family member, doing some of these other internships, like I said. Um, don't get so focused on, I have to have this experience in order to really be relevant for these internships or full-time offers. There's lots of things that you can do to sort of qualify yourself.
Awesome, thanks. Yeah, I think a lot of people in the audience are probably grateful for all those examples you just provided, because it isn't like a one track to getting that interview. There are so many different options and how you can speak about it and gain that relevant experience. Samson, I know you've talked a lot about feeling like you came from a non-traditional path as a math major, not being part of like a business school trajectory. How did you think about getting the relevant work experience you needed to confidently recruit for investment banking?
Yeah, so I would definitely say, again, like starting early is key, as Drew mentioned. Like, probably your junior summer or summer analyst programs are going to be the biggest feeders for these roles. So if you can get relevant internship before then, relevant experience before then, that's going to be huge. I personally worked at like a weird kind of research brokerage firm that did like international equities trading for like equities across like countries in like Africa and South America. It was like totally unrelated to like your classic investment banking experience, but kind of to Drew's point, not trying to think like, oh, I need to be in an investment banking seat, but kind of, having some role that's tangentially related that you can speak about intellectually and say, what you gain from it, but why you want to be in investment banking, which might be different in some ways. Yeah.
Awesome. Grace, I will pass this one over to you. So yeah, you have a lot of different experiences. It could be startups, it could be, working for a family business, it could be another finance role, interning at a VC. What have you seen recruiters want to see on that resume, and how do you recommend kind of like tailoring your work experience to get your foot in the door at first?
Yeah, and I would actually just say that with a lot of internships that you're doing, or maybe like, with a lot of the internships that you're doing, like you may not have as much like hands-on experience as you want at the beginning. And I think it's really important to kind of like to really like internalize what you're doing, and like to really like take advantage of those internship experiences so that you can have a like fulsome experience to talk about. But I think specifically like on your resume, I think kind of emphasizing the technical role that you played, kind of being able to talk to not just like on your resume, but also throughout your interviews, like what was what you specifically did. I think that kind of belongs more on a resume. And then also being able to like to talk about kind of whatever you worked on like actually was. So to show basically like this is okay, sorry, to show not only that this is like what you did, but this is like why you did it, I think is really important. And I think, there's a lot of like, it really just depends on like, what the specific transaction or deal was, or like what your specific role was, but being able to not only show what, but also like why, I think is like really huge, not only on a resume, but also during interviews. So.
Awesome. Yeah, I think that's really helpful. And I think just to plug coaching and all these three coaches that are on the panel, their role is to help each of you, not only with, the interview prep that we've talked about a lot, but like the pre-interview prep. So going back to the story creation, having someone to practice with, think through your own story. And then now that we're talking about resumes, working with a coach to help bring those bullet points to life. A lot of, jobs, sometimes you're thinking about what you did day to day, but having someone there who can really help you speak to the impact and the technical role that you played, as Grace mentioned, is huge. So if that's something you're like maybe stressing about or wanting that area of assistance, that's what all these coaches are here for. And they can definitely help you feel confident in submitting your resume, which is really, such an important step to then landing the interview. With that, thank you so much, Grace, for sharing. What advice do each of you have for nailing the why banking and why this bank question? This has come up throughout really this whole session tonight, and would love to hear. Samson, let's start with you, then we can go directly to Grace, and then Drew, if you want to bring us home.
Yeah, I saw someone mention in the chat, like, no one's mentioned like money or like things like that. And I just wanted to maybe cover that and say, like, I think having genuine reasons that kind of span beyond just like the financial incentives or like very clear, I want to do banking so I can leave banking and get a different job. I think, that's never going to be a successful strategy, I would say, coming into these interviews or networking sessions. And so again, kind of finding what about the role, the industry, really speaks to you, is going to be personal. But I think finding that like genuine reason, whether it's something as simple as like, in talking with other junior bankers, it's clear that I can get, I can't get the same experience anywhere else as a 22-year-old out of school. Like that's a great reason, and something that I think a lot of people contend with. So that would be kind of maybe a general piece of advice there. I think for why this bank, I think that's definitely one that will be super helpful with networking. So if you networked with people at a specific bank or in a specific group, and you've kind of laid down that foundation, often even like naming those people by name and saying, yeah, I had a great conversation with, this person, whether it was a while ago or in your interview prep or something like that, or even if it's one of us, if you're interviewing with Jefferies and I work there, happy to kind of provide my insight and say, hey, I've talked to, former employees of the firm, and these kind of cultural notes or areas really stand out to me. I think that stuff goes a long way to differentiating yourself, again, versus the hundreds, thousands of people that kind of, take the more generic approach.
Yeah, I completely agree. And I think specifically speaking to like why banking, I think the more people you speak with, the more you'll see that there's definitely I think each bank has more or less a unique culture that they, whether they have or like they believe they have. And I think that's kind of what will come through through your conversations with like full-time people at these banks. And highlighting that in your interview will kind of help, I think will help you stand out as someone who has done your research, versus as someone who's just like, oh, like I heard this bank, like, they sound awesome. I think it's cool. Those aren't really as like, I think, solid reasons to like want to join a bank. But I would also just like this is actually a tip I heard from someone else when I was recruiting, but I think like each bank, sometimes like they'll have like certain like types of like lingo that they'll use specifically. Like I think this person, the example that they used specifically was that like at JPM, I think they like to say that they're like externally competitive, but like internally like team oriented, like something like that. And I think being able to like use like little lingo in your interviews that you like may have heard can again like represent to your recruiter that, you know, I'm someone who's like serious. I've done all the research and all the networking to set me apart as a candidate who's like truly interested in this bank.
Awesome, thanks. And Drew?
Yeah, I'll keep it brief. Spend time on this one, and really think about it, and then ask people, you know, why are you in banking, and why did you go into banking? Why have you stayed in banking? What did you find that was different about your experience in banking versus what you thought it would be? Things like that are good questions to sort of get you thinking about yourself and why you're doing this. One thing on why this bank, one thing that I talked about, for example, in my Lazard interviews was sort of their business model as a boutique sort of advisory firm, and why that was differentiated, why that resonated with me. So that's something that you can touch on too. I think Grace's comments around lingo and things that are things that bankers at that bank say, or attitudes that they have towards their work or towards their firm, are good little nuggets that you can include for sure in your interview to show that you're informed, that you've been networking, and so I echo that statement.
Awesome. Thanks so much all for sharing. All this is incredibly insightful, and I think just really bringing home the importance of doing your research, chatting with people, practicing, doing mocks, knowing this answer right off the bat, because it's usually like the very beginning of the interview. And so having done your prep, I think it was Grace who mentioned at the beginning, it's really going to set the tone for the rest of the conversation. So thanks all for sharing. I guess we have talked a lot about the behavioral portion of the interview. If any of you want to add anything in, tips, tricks to stand out during this part, would love to hear. Grace, I can pass it to you, but Drew or Samson after, feel free to chime in before we move forward.
Yeah, so I would say, let me see. Okay, so additional tips and tricks. I would say that like when I was recruiting, and like I think even after recruiting and now, I think it's just important to kind of like be aware of what's going on. So just like reading the news, keeping up on like what deals are happening out there, you know, being informed by like, okay, like this is like, I guess trying to have like opinions on like why those deals might have happened, I think is really important.
Like
for
Microsoft Cloud
for technical interviews, for the technical questions, for me, I found the 400 question guide really helpful. A few times I just went to like bamsec.com and pulled down like, you know, like financials for a random company, and just like tried to, I mean, it was like looking back, probably not like super great, but just tried to like build, you know, like mini models based on like those financials, and just like trying to understand like what's going on in a company. Like sometimes even like if you're really interested in a company or a specific situation, just going and reading like digging deeper in their like 10K or like their press releases, and just like figuring out what's going on, and like if that is interesting to you and like why it's interesting to you is like really important. You always want to go into an interview as like prepared as possible, because I think that really does come off. Like if you're prepared, you'll be able to speak about it like extremely well, and I think that really does like set you apart from other candidates versus, you know, just kind of memorizing like a few metrics from like a deal and kind of regurgitating that. So
Awesome, thanks. Really important to do your preparation. Drew or Samson, anything you want to add here?
I always thought it was a good idea when you get a behavioral question, tie it back to a real life scenario from an internship, your schoolwork, and then, you know, have prepared the answers to some of the more generic behavioral questions you might get. Tell me a time where you were challenged or you had difficulty or was a difficult situation working in a team, those sorts of questions I was thinking about. I had prepared in the back of my mind. I had experiences that I could talk to, and a lot of times I didn't get asked those questions, but they were always sort of variations uh, of one of those questions. And so I was prepared more or less to be able to answer. And so I always recommend, um, yeah, we focus a lot on preparing yourself for the technical questions. That is important. But I think there's actually a decent amount of prep you can do to be prepared for those behavioral questions, which are also important.
Yeah,
Thanks.
I would just add, I saw Scott mentioning kind of like nailing the technical side is very important, but how much leeway do you get on that, especially with the behavioral side? And I thought I would kind of answer that here in that, we all know the technical side is kind of what you focus on and what you study. And as Grace mentioned, is like, a big part of the prep. But I would say certainly not to, forget about the behavioral side, because, as Drew mentioned, there's kind of the airport test. And especially talking to people that are a little more senior, they want to just talk to someone that they find, enjoyable and they get along with. And so, if you've over-indexed on the technical side and your three statements back and front, but you're kind of stumped by the more simple kind of why did you choose this major? What's your favorite class in college questions? Then, I think you're gonna have a challenge. And so to Scott's question, I think, having a strong behavioral side can actually make up for, you make a small error on a technical question. And if people like you, that will work really well.
Awesome. Thanks so much for sharing. Just in the matter of, or in the interest of time, we have 4 minutes left. I'd love to be able to answer this question and then go rapid fire on the last one we have prepared. I'd love to hear, so we can go, let's go Drew, Samson, Grace. What is a resource or like process you use to nailing the quantitative technical portion? Grace mentioned one earlier, but would love to hear rapid fire. Go for it, Drew.
Really quick, the best thing that I did as an undergrad was my sophomore year, I entered a case competition alone and built a 3-statement model from scratch. It was really me sort of figuring it all out, and then did an LBO. So I really got to learn how the financial statements work, and then how bankers, think about projections and things like that. It was not perfect, and I'm sure there were mistakes everywhere, but that was the single best thing that I ever did as an undergrad to prepare technically, was just essentially doing what investment bankers do, but just on my own desktop as a student. And that was experience that I drew on when I interviewed, I felt that really helped me prepare. And so I always recommend that to people. Do it yourself, figure it out. Don't just read off a page, the answers to the 400 question guide. Get an Excel, and try it for yourself. I think that's the best thing that helped me for sure.
That's awesome. Samson.
Yeah, one quick piece of advice I would say is to talk through your thinking in the interview when you're going through these. Obviously, it's a little less prep and more like on the spot, but I think if you kind of just come up with an answer out of nowhere, it's super helpful for interviewers to actually see how you think. And if you make a small mistake or you make a misstep, they're much more forgiving if you are thinking through the problem in the right way and you can actually articulate the way you're thinking. So that would be one huge piece of advice for any like technical questions.
Love it. Grace, bring us home.
Sorry, I think I actually accidentally mentioned this in my previous answer, but I really loved the 400 question guide. I think that has a lot of kind of like the basics and the fundamentals. And in addition to that, I think there are some really, really great websites out there that kind of go a little bit more in depth or have like a little bit more like complex questions that I think will prepare you just like that extra level. Yeah, I would say those sources.
Awesome. Okay, let's do this last question. Rapid fire again. We can go Grace, Samson, Drew. Final tip. This is your last word that you're leaving the audience with. Would love to hear. Go for it.
I would actually just say, like, when you're recruiting, don't underestimate like culture at a bank. That's actually something I think that's kind of a nebulous concept, but it's actually like incredibly important when you're actually working, like when you're actually at your desk and when you're working with these people. Just make sure that like you understand the culture by like networking with people and kind of understanding from those conversations kind of what the values of the bank are and whether that kind of aligns with what your long-term goals in banking or finance or whatever it may be are.
Great. Samson, take it away.
Yeah. I would say, oh, Drew, go. I had one and I forgot it.
No worries. Don't underestimate networking. Networking is the single most important thing you'll do to land your investment banking role. You have to get an interview. You have to get the opportunity to present yourself to a firm. And how you do that is networking. Something I wish I knew and something I'm always telling people. So just network like crazy.
Awesome.
And I was going to say, I remembered like, ask for help, reach out for help. Again, like the fact that you're all here is a great first step, but whether it's a friend, a family member, a former colleague or a coach on Leland, any of us like, seeking more professional, serious help. I think you're not alone in this process. Thousands of people have gone through it and will continue to go through it. And so, yeah, I think reaching out and finding those resources is key.
Love it. Thank you all so much. Just as a final word and most important word we'll say tonight is thank you to our incredible panelists. Please go hype them up in the chat, express your gratitude. These are all extremely busy people with amazing careers and families and lives. And so we really appreciate them taking time tonight to come out here, share their expertise, be so genuine and real about the insight that they're providing. So thank you so much. Please, each of you go work with them. We will send a follow-up email with their profiles. Many of them have mentioned ways in which you can work together, developing your story, networking help, resume, interview prep, whatever it is, they're here to help and in your corner. So thank you, panelists. And with that, thank you all for joining. We will send a follow-up email with all of these steps and resources. But main thing we want to say here is let's go help you get your dream investment banking role. That's why we're here. And we look forward to helping you out in that process. So thanks again, and hope everyone has a lovely rest of their evening or morning, wherever you are. And just know that the Leland team is in your corner and excited to help you as you take on this incredibly hard but exciting process. So we're here and look forward to working with you. Thanks all.
Thanks, everyone.
Thank you.